U službenom posjetu u Hrvatskoj je prva zamjenica ministra vanjskih poslova Ukrajine Emine Džapar. Tim povodom razgovaramo s njom i u programu N1 televizije. Ms. Džapar, welcome to our program.
I'm very happy to be here.
I'll start with a recent essay by Russian President Vladimir Putin. It was very controversial. He basically stated that Ukrainians and Russians are one people. And also he questioned borders and sovereignty of Ukraine. How do you see that essay?
This even looks like a poem, a poem that justifies actually a very criminal attitude that we have been facing for 8 years. And he questions the borders not only in this article, but also in fact and in life. And this is what we have seen in 2014 when Russia invaded Crimea. And I remember the cynical press conference of President Putin. He said, this was not Russian army when he was questioned if this were a Russian army in Crimea. And he said, oh no, you can buy a military uniform in any shop, just go and buy. And this was not Russian army. And then in a couple of weeks after, he said that the situation in Ukraine turned out to be that way, that we had to act. And then, of course, he recognized that this was a Russian army. And I remember this feeling because I was a journalist there back then in 2014, and I traveled Crimea back and forth. And of course, we knew, and local population knew, that this was a Russian army. So, and then the situation in Donbass, when we still have a very cynical official position of Russia who claims to be a mediator rather than a country that is responsible for the war, because Russia is fueling up the war in Donbass. They provide weaponry, they coordinate the military activities, they take local people to Russia and make them go through the military service, and then they bring them back and say these are local people, those who fight for their, their vision of the future of Ukraine and so on. And they still claim that Russia is not there. And of course, with this article, what we see, first, he is trying to justify this very classic narrative when he thinks, but he kind of, he tries to convince himself and his own people that Russians and Belarusians and Ukrainian people is the one nation. And he comes up with the pages of historical context trying to justify. But I think that the main, what he's trying to do is first to justify his criminal policy and aggression. And second, he shifts the attention from the domestic issues to the foreign issues, and he shifts attention from the today's situation to the historical context.
He said that Russia was robbed historically. Do you think that annexation of the Crimea is not his final goal concerning situation in Donbas region?
Well, having seen the situation in 2014, of course, we have to be concerned and have to be in tonus and have to expect actually further actions. And I think that this can be a geopolitical concept for the future. So, of course, with this article, we believe that he tries to put the stones for the future, to kind of to make the line for the future aggression, justifying his next steps. Because what he says actually, he says that Belarus, Ukraine and Russia, or Ukraine and Belarus is sacred place, sacred lands, who he wants to gather and to collect like his predecessors did centuries ago. And I think, of course, with the recent military build-up on the borders with Russia, and we have 2,000 kilometers of borders, of common border, what we've seen just a couple of months ago, I think that he had some tactical aims and issues to solve. And we should not escape the feeling of being concerned that further actions can be committed by Vladimir Putin, who is collecting his sacred lands.
Well, in that context, it's interesting that Belarusian President Lukashenko accused Europe and United States that they are handling hybrid war against Russia and China and Belarus, and he said that can be introduction into World War III. Do you see connection between Lukashenko and Putin statements, which are all in last week?
We unfortunately see this great connection at the moment and so far between the authoritarian regimes. Let us be very clear that we are very consolidated with Belarusian people, and we have thousands of Belarusian refugees, I would say, or those activists, those IT sector employees who come to Ukraine and find their safe place in their struggle for freedom. We are supportive with the Europe. I mean, we are consolidated with the European Union. We have joined almost all of the declarations and statements of the European Union with regards to the situation in Belarus, judging and openly say that Belarusian people, they have their right to claim their freedom. And what we see that Lukashenko is day by day gets closer to this warm hug of Putin, thus isolating more and more. And I think that this is responsibility of Lukashenko. And of course for us, as far as we have over 1,000 kilometers of common border with Belarus, it's yet another source of concern.
Well, I'll go back to Putin's essay one more time, because he says that Ukrainian sovereignty is only possible in partnership with Russia. How do you see that message?
This partnership costed lives for my country. This partnership actually costed the very deep Ukrainian identity, when for centuries Russia was trying to erase this identity, destroying Ukrainian language, destroying Ukrainian culture and traditions, forming the generations of, we call Ivan не помнящий родства, saying that those Ivans who doesn't know what is their roots, just to cut the root. And I think that this is whole ideology of Putin, and he did the same with Crimean Tatars, the nation that I represent. And of course it's very important to know true and real historical context, and I think that Crimea is probably the biggest target for falsification and historical manipulation, because in this article, by the way, he also claims that Crimea became a part of Russian Empire, but he says nothing that there were Crimean Tatars as indigenous people, as people that actually an ethnogeny of whom is actually consists of all of the tribes and populations ever inhabited Crimea. And then when the Crimean Khaganate or the Crimean statehood was there, Catherine II annexed Crimea. And what she did, the same that Putin has been doing for 8 years. Catherine II, she repressed all those who were not ready to bow in front of the Tsar. All those Crimean Tatar aristocracy, they fled. Within 100 years after the first annexation, 1/3 of Crimean Tatar population fled to Romania, Bulgaria, former Ottoman Empire, but then to Turkey, and this is exactly why we have a huge diaspora in Turkey. Over 2 million of ethnic Crimean Tatars, they still live in modern Turkey. And she, of course, oppressed aristocracy, religious elite. And then the second pillar of our tragical history is the Stalin's deportation of 1944. It's actually a continuation of this Russian attitude. When under the pretext of the collaboration with Nazi Germany, Crimean Tatars, they were put in the cattle shed wagons, but if you see the statistics, these were women, children and seniors, because Crimean Tatar men were fighting in the Red Army against Nazi Germany, actually, and there were no men in Crimea those days. And this was 18th of May, so they committed two-day operation when they put every single Crimean Tatar who lived in Crimea in these cattle shed wagons, taken into unknown direction for almost a month. And they exiled Crimean Tatars to mostly Uzbekistan, the Central Asian countries. And unfortunately, this was an act of genocide, because almost half of Crimean Tatar population died either on the days of deportation because of hunger, no water, and diseases, or years after, because of hunger and inhuman conditions that they were brought in.
What happened to your family?
My family was not an exception. My grandmother, both of my grandmothers actually, they were children those days. They were deported. And my grandmother, as far as she managed to grab some gold that they had in their family, then she exchanged this gold for the bread, and then doing so she survived. And she also managed to help to her siblings, the brothers and sisters whom she took, because she didn't have father. Her mother died. And then she was the one to take care of those kids. And then what she also did, she bribed the lady in the dorm. Like it's not a dormitory. It's a place. It's an orphanage where her siblings were put, 2 boys, 5 years old and 7 years old, and they almost died because of the hunger. And then she bribed the orphanage employee, and then she also rescued these 2 boys. And every time when we discussed deportation, even after decades, I mean, she was always crying. And I never expected that I would experience almost the same when I abandoned Crimea after 2014, when I understood that I would not and will not be able to live under the Russian flag, and now not having the possibility to go to Crimea and having the same feeling and exactly understanding what my grandmothers and my people went through those days.
What's the situation now on that peninsula, and why did you have to leave?
That's a very difficult issue because Crimean Tatars, they did their best to fight for their right to live in Crimea for decades, because during the Soviet period, this was non grata people. It was prohibited to learn the history of Crimean Tatars, to even discuss the situation around Crimean Tatars, or to talk in Crimean Tatar language. And of course, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Crimean Tatars, this was a very phenomenal issue. Thousands, of Crimean Tatars, they started to return to Crimea, leaving everything that they had in Uzbekistan almost already by those days, like houses, work, employment, everything. So they just take their suitcases and massively return to Crimea. And as far as my parents, they came to Crimea from Kherson, but before that they lived in Krasnodar. And this is a very interesting thing because Crimean Tatars, as far as they were not allowed to live in Crimea, so they did not get propiska, registration, so you could not live in Crimea. So they were settling around Crimea, and this is why we still have a great number of Crimean Tatars living in Kuban, which is the Russian territory, and Kherson region, which is the Ukrainian mainland territory. And then when they came to Crimea with 2 suitcases and me, 3-year-old child, they settled in Kerch, but they spent a couple of years changing the apartments, because when special services found out that the Crimean Tatars were renting the apartment, they came to the owners and made them and forced them to squeeze out my parents. And when they had some money to buy a small house, so we settled finally in Kerch. And I remember my childhood when in the school, all of the schools were Russian language school, and the language of instruction was Russian. And Crimean Tatars, they were always pro-Ukrainian, kind of understanding that if we live in Ukraine, we have to know at least the language. And when this whole chauvinistic wave started to be galvanized by Russia, when just imagine yourself, the Ukrainian language and subject have been integrated in the school curriculum as subject. This whole history about the genocide against Russian language started, and I was the one who did not sign this petition against Ukrainian language. And of course I went through this discrimination during my school period because I was a Crimean Tatar.
Do you see any resolution to this now frozen conflict? We have annexation of the Crimea, we have sort of sanctions against Russia, but nothing has changed. It's a frozen conflict, I would say.
Let's first discuss what Crimea is today. Let us imagine, Ilya, that you go to Crimea. Just let us imagine. What would you see? Or any other foreigner or any other Croat would go there. What would anyone see in Crimea? Of course, you will see a number of infrastructure projects that Russia have managed to demonstrate in Crimea as a showcase of their glory. They have built up roads, but if you see what kind of road is this is the Tavrida road that unites Kerch and Sevastopol, both military cities. They have built up the Kerch Bridge. We call it prothesis, just to unite the Russian mainland and the Crimean Peninsula. They are modernizing all of the components of their military presence, land, air, sea. They have been dominating in the Black Sea already. They have 7 submarines, which is more than enough to control the whole aquatorium of the Black Sea. They have built up the new prison in Crimea. They have built up a new international airport, but no other flights but for Russian actually land in that airport. They have built up even kindergartens and schools, but if you see what for, I mean, these are for children of hundreds of thousands of FSB and security service and the military personnel whom they already managed to bring in Crimea. So they change the demography in Crimea. From this repressive...
So basically, is Crimea Russian for good now?
No,
I mean, with everything that they are doing there.
And the conclusion is, I mean, no, the conclusion is that you could have a false image. You will see these infrastructure projects, but the cause behind is a military cause, because Crimean Peninsula is a military base of Russia, and it has nothing to do with people. And the most concerning thing that has been taking place in Crimea is that if you claim, Ilya, that Crimea is Ukraine and dare to publicly say it in Crimea, you will be imprisoned for at least 5 years. You can be imprisoned. And with this repressive criminal code reality, they squeeze out loyal population and they bring hundreds of thousands of Russians. I mean, already in Crimea, 500,000 of newcomers already there, and for the population of 2.5 million of whole peninsula, it's a huge quantity of people. So they changed the demography, they have turned it into a military base, and if you see Russian propaganda, Russia Today, or Russian diplomats or officials, they say that they take care about people, they build up roads and so on, so on. My main message is that you should not be misguided by the illusion of the picture, because picture sometimes does not show the reality, and the hidden reality is fear. When we still have donosy, you know, when the people grassing each other because of the Ukrainian, you know, sentiments behind. In schools, even in kindergartens, you have the FSB guidance. I mean, they control everyone in Crimea. And you cannot publicly criticize or speak what you think, and there is no freedom. And I remember my first feeling when I left Crimea to the Ukrainian mainland, and I left it in half a year after. So I kind of remained living in Crimea for almost half a year. And my first feeling when I crossed the so-called administrative line, I really could kind of sense it with my skin, like finally I can breathe easily and freely. And I call it freedom tours, because people, they still travel. I mean, from Crimea there is a traffic of people, obviously, and when you ask those people, most of them, they are very consolidated, saying that this is the land of freedom, and this is something that is being lost, unfortunately, in Crimea.
Do you fear that the same scenario would be in Donbas, maybe, region? What's the situation now, basically? And with the whole agreement, we know that Croatian Prime Minister proposed like Croatian example of peaceful reintegration. But what's the connection between Ukrainian government and the rebels? Is there any communication?
It wasn't, I mean, we don't supposed to have a communication with the separatists whom we do not recognize. I know that Croatian people can not only understand what has been happening in Ukraine, but also feel it, because you have experienced almost the same scenario in 90s. When Srpska Krajina was there, this is so-called DNR and LNR, so-called Luhansk People's Republic, and Donbas, Donetsk People's Republic, whom we do not recognize. And our position, which is very principled, is not to have a direct contact, and this is exactly what Russia wants us to do. So what we see, I mean, of course, Crimea and Donbas is a little bit different, even though it's two strokes of one criminal picture, I mean, behind Russia. Different scenarios, because they have tried to integrate Crimea into their legal space and as the part of the so-called Russian territory. In Donbas, it's different. They are just, you know, fueling up this war, saying that these are separatists, these are Ukrainian people willing to live their own life, and they are trying to make us to recognize, you know, this separatism.
But is there a peaceful solution then?
I mean, we are looking for that. We have Minsk agreements, we have Normandy format, we have negotiations, but what we see is that there is no readiness for this constructive stand.
No progress.
There was a ceasefire regime signed back in July 2020. And since the beginning of the year, already 41 Ukrainian soldiers have been shot by snipers. So I think that there is still a need for additional impetus, and this is exactly what Ukrainian President meant, saying that other countries, meaning Great Britain and the United States, should be a bit more proactive in promoting the cause, because I think that tactically Russia has been dreaming to silence up the situation, both in Crimea and Donbass. What we see, they're trying to legitimize status quo both in Crimea and Donbass, and of course every single attention that we pay, especially if we speak about the highest level, it's a very irritating factor for Russia, because they are interested in having this constant instrument of control, of kind of shaking the boat, and I call it low-cost attitude. It doesn't cost that much money if there is a full-scale war, but controlling their agents, they control the situation in Ukraine or want to control the situation.
What are your expectations from new American administration? I mean, there is a new person in the White House. What do you expect from Joe Biden?
Our bilateral relations are very intensive. Since 2014, United States have demonstrated its clear and consistent stand on the territorial integrity and security challenges that we are living in. We have hundreds of factors that demonstrate actually the strategic partnership that we have with the US. After the new presidential administration have settled in the White House, twice our presidents have talked on the phone, and the meeting, actually the physical meeting upon the invitation of the Joe Biden will take place at the end of August, and of course we expect to discuss the biggest challenge for us, which is the Russian aggression. And then the other is our aspiration that we have incorporated in our constitution, saying that our main foreign service or foreign policy aim is to be full-fledged member of the European Union and NATO. And there was a Bucharest summit decision dated 2008 when we were promised to have membership action plan. And this is exactly what we are trying to promote so far. And the recent summit that took place in June in Brussels, with the participation of the American president, the final document came out of that summit, again clearly says that third countries cannot influence the decision and the sovereign decision of other countries willing to be integrated in the security bloc, in the security alliance. And there was a kind of re-emphasis that Ukraine has a right to be integrated, and those messages were very strong. So, concluding my response to your question, our partnership is very strong. We have a bipartisan system of support, both by Democrats and Republicans. President Biden knows details about Ukraine because he many times visited Ukraine before his presidency. And we believe that this is a great argument for not only knowing but understanding the context, which is super important, because my country goes through this global reconstruction. It's difficult to say what dimension of our life is not under reform. Everything. Army is being reformed according to the standards of NATO. We are enjoying the Enhanced Opportunities Partnership, which is about even the exchange of the sensitive information, and it is again something that shows that there is a trust. And of course, when it's about integration, you have to go through the path. So just to get to this destination, you have to, step by step transform, and we demonstrate a high level of and speed of reforms.
Your other goal is European Union, but how do you see a policy of European Union towards Russia, it's not unilateral. You have Poland and Baltic states who are very opposing. You have Hungary, who is very friendly to Russia, we can say. Then Germany, who has its own economical interests like Nord Stream and etc.
Yes, of course, we understand that probably EU countries and member states are not that consolidated, and we have different litmus papers that show actually absence of consolidation on several sensitive issues, and Ukrainian case is one of those testing fields, I would say. I mean, just going back a little bit to the question with NATO, just recently we had a letter of 13 countries, member states of NATO, to Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, those countries, and we think that this is a core of our support of NATO aspirations. Same we have with EU, so we have countries very much supportive to the EU aspiration, and then the skeptical countries, but this is a field for our work, our diplomats on everyday basis. They not only find the argument, but we also demonstrate very concrete steps. With the EU, we have the association agreement. This is thousands of pages of action plans, actually, that we submit annually as a report, what we have managed to do with regards to the implementation of association agreement. The new and recent initiative, association trio, that we have 3 foreign ministers performed in Brussels just a couple of months ago.
But do you feel everything is going very slowly?
I will not be that fast in coming up with this kind of conclusion. I think that it's again about the path. What is much more important is that Ukrainian society is consolidated towards EU and NATO.
But you have still big problems like most of Eastern European countries. For instance, corruption. What do you do on that plan?
I mean, we do a lot. I mean, we do adopt legislation to perform that association agreement is not only a declaration. I mean, if you see every energy security, army, corruption and anti-corruption agencies that we have launched, governance, I mean, the whole spectrum is there under the association agreement, and we do demonstrate. I mean, we do have summits, we do have consultations, we do have consultations on Crimea, we do have consultations on Donbass. I mean, it's there. So I don't think it's slow. I think it's a super intensive. And let me give you the very recent example. For the first time in our bilateral history with EU, I mean, we had cyber consultations. We are the first Eastern Partnership country to have cyber dialogue with EU, and we are among those 7 other countries, non-EU member states, who has the cybersecurity consultations with EU, but for Russia and but for US, Korea, and the rest. So I think that the level
media?
of
You were a journalist, and Freedom House named Ukraine as having partly free media. The reason is Russian journalists are banned of traveling, some Russian social networks are banned, and 3 TV channels too.
Yes, I mean, we can talk to Baltic countries, what they did in order to face the challenges, as we call it, hybrid warfare and information warfare. Look, we are living in a digital world. And if we have rules that define the order in other spheres, why don't we and why shouldn't we have the same in a digital world? So what we have revealed as a great risk for our security is something that is of attempt to influence the election process, attempt to influence the political conjuncture, and this is exactly what they're trying to do, I mean, Russia, by shaking our boat. And for them...
Would you call it propaganda war?
I mean, it's not only propaganda, these are special operations that they do. What is hybrid warfare? Let me explain you. And democracies are very fragile with regards to the challenges of hybrid warfare. It is when they take the democratic instruments and they target it against the very core of democracy. When freedom of media, kind of freedom of expression, turns into the freedom of lies. When they take their agents of influence, and we have those in Ukraine, we still have those in the Ukrainian parliament, and they exploit those silly idiots to justify their own narratives. And they, like I remember they have changed the military doctrine in 2015, as far as I know, and they performed a new thesis about cognitive war. So Russia opened up the door to raise their cognitive influence. This means that they open up the door for financing the propaganda, because it's like radiation. You can't see the radiation, but it affects your health. Same with information. You cannot have a feeling, but it affects, you can't see it, but it affects your perception, and at the end of the day, it affects your political choice.
In conclusion, you are now in official visit to Croatia. How would you assess political ties of Croatia and Ukraine, and where do you see possibility for development of economic cooperation?
Well, first of all, not only as an official, but as a human being, as a Crimean Tatar, as a Ukrainian, hvala vam for great support that we have from Croatia and Croatian people. Indeed, when any country goes through the toughest period in the modern history, and this is what you did, you went through this, you fought for your territorial integrity, you fought for your freedom, and this is exactly what we are doing. And in this very fragile period of our history, friendship is something that is of great importance for us, and this is exactly what we see from Croatia. We do enjoy your support with regards to our multilateral cooperation in Vienna, in Strasbourg, in New York, in Geneva, in other international forums. Our bilateral track is also very active. We just a couple of hours ago had a forum with business, when together with me we have Ukrainian Women Business Club representatives having different meetings with Croatian business, having this face-to-face contact and discussing the potential of economic ties. And I think that we have a very solid and wonderful ground of political support, of historical context that we feel. So this is the right time to untap it and untap the economic potential. And as our ambassador Vasil Kirilic says, there are several things that unite us: Sloboda, football, and history.
Yeah, and in the latest European Football Championship, Ukraine managed to be better than Croatia.
Yes, but we are still friendly countries.
Mrs. Džapar, thank you for your time.
Hvala.